one of the things I was really struck about in somehow Thoughts on Love and Lamott um, were your wonderful stories about being literally a Sunday school teacher. You are
I know.
literally a
I
Sunday school
literally am. Yeah.
teacher, and the activities and Jesus and the donkey and the pretzels, lessons from Sunday school. What are your three lessons that you have gleaned by being in that position as a Sunday school teacher?
Oh, I love that question. Well, every book I've written for the last 10 books has had Sunday school stories because the kids are just so trippy and they make me laugh and they throw the lights on for me. But the first thing I do with every group is we do a game called Loved and Chosen. And the game is, like I would say, is anyone here in this room wearing a sort of faded red and black Pendleton type shirt over a black T-shirt that says "Be kind"? And then because that's how kids raise their hand. They look around, they look down, they try to flag you down. We're 3 feet away, right? And so I'll say, Rainn, you know what? You are loved and chosen. You are adored as is. And then, so that we do that a lot. And we do one based on a story I'll tell you, which is a woman I knew in recovery, a sober woman who about 12 years ago got an oral cancer, and she had to have part of her jaw removed and part of her tongue removed. So she had this crazy speech impediment. Happiest person I ever knew, just grateful, grateful, grateful. Grateful she was alive, grateful she was sober, grateful she had a path, little light to see by in a community. This is 5 years ago, she raises her hand. She says, it's come back and I'm going to need to do everything all over again. Minor surgery, milder surgery, and chemo and radiation. Well, all the other women start in with the way you do. Well, okay, I had a cousin and his barber had that same kind of cancer and he did this unborn kale protocol and he's fine now. It was 100 years and whatever. And you know what? She listened sweetly and she just waved it away like cigarette smoke. And she said, you know what? God's got it. And that's what I teach my kids. And we make jewelry that says God's got it, no matter what. You know, that we are going to get ourselves in holes that are too big for us to get ourselves out of. And that the answer, like I was raised by intellectual atheists, was to figure it out. And the solution is surrender, is to just put down our weapons and come over to the other side.
That just reminded me of, so I was kind of raised by my stepmom. It's a long story. We're pretty different people. It was a pretty terrible marriage I've spoken about before between my dad and stepmom. But there was a certain point in time I was playing Hamlet at NYU, and I had this really difficult director who, after every rehearsal, gave me a report card. Can you imagine?
Oh, God.
You're 22 years old.
Yeah.
You're rehearsing Hamlet and you're trying things out and, that this tutu solid flesh should melt. And he would be like, when you do the tutu solid flesh monologue, you were too pontificating, but you didn't find the truth of it, C+, like,
Right.
And you're like, oh, fuck. I was sucking worse and worse every day. I was not getting better. I was getting worse and worse and worse every single day. And I knew it. And it's a weird thing with acting. You can know when you're sucking and like what tools to get out of it, but you just can't. It's just a weird thing about acting. And I was at the end of my rope and I called my stepmom. For some reason, I never really usually turned to her for any kind of wisdom. And the only thing she had to say is like, Rainn, sometimes at the end of the day, you just have to get on your knees and you just have to pray. And I hung up. I was very kind of atheist adjacent during that period of my life. And I was like, there's nothing else.
Right.
Nothing else is waiting for me.
Right.
I'm going to fucking hit my knees.
Right.
And literally like knees and like, oh God, help me.
Yeah.
And I then went to the head of the acting program and I somehow found his I think, home number and called him, and I was in tears, and I told him what was going on, and that director got fired.
Wow.
He was out the door. Then I got to redo Hamlet with the director of the program directing it. And was I great? I wasn't great, but I was good enough for a 22-year-old tackling the world's most difficult role. And it all ended up being great. Did God answer my prayers? Did God give me that spark to make that phone call? But that was certainly what I needed to hear at the time. And that was just total surrender. And sometimes that's how we find God, as you know, from the rooms. You find God when your forehead has been pounded into the pavement enough, and that's the only recourse.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Well, I personally believe that grace bats last, but it's like John Lennon saying, everything sorts out everything works out in the end. Everything will be okay in the end. It's not okay. It's not the end. Or Orson Welles saying it's a happy or a sad movie, depending on where you end it. But it's for me, everything is just so dramatic, and I feel it's so. I think it's all it's all over for England right now, today, here and now. And but my faith. I heard someone say, "Hope is faith with a track record." And another thing that I would teach my kids.
Reverse that and say faith.
Faith is hope with a track record. Yeah, you can say it either way, but it ties in with something that. Susan B. Anthony's grandniece, who's a sober person, a sober therapist, psychotherapist, said, which is in these really hard, scary times, we remember to remember, and that we remember that we've been here before. We've been in the nightmare. We've been in the dark night of the soul. We've been rejected. We've been left. We've been neglected. And we remember that we came through. We remember that 2 or 3 friends were surrounded us with the white blood cells of love, and they healed us and they pulled us back to our feet. We remember all those other times where we were this scared and this lost. And we think that maybe that might just happen again. So you wanted 3 things that I tell my Sunday school kids?
Or things that you impart to them, but things that you have learned from that experience of being a Sunday school teacher.
Well, I've learned that one of the things I love about kids is that they're really real. The ancient Greeks called God the really real. And kids can be little monsters, no doubt, but they're very real. They don't have the kind of persona yet in place that we have. I love that line of the great comedian Duncan Trussell's, who says, "When you first meet me, you're meeting my bodyguard." And the kids don't have very effective bodyguards yet. And it just shows on their faces and in their eyes what they're going through. And they're having rough lives. I mean, a lot of them are brown, and they're having stuff happen on the blacktop that is just heinous, awful. They're going through nightmarish divorces. Their parents are as sick as parents can be, and they're going through it. And they're in my arms for an hour. What do? I teach them a really funny story from the Hebrew Bible about some brat like Jonah, or the prodigal son's older brother who sits outside on the curb or whatever there was and 3,000 years ago, and won't go into the banquet to celebrate his brother's living and coming home to the family because he's so pissed off that the father loves the son the same he loves the good boy, the guy who stayed and worked the farm, and won't come in. Well, the question for my kids is, will you? Are you going to come in? You were perfect. You did the right thing. You did are you going to come into where the love is and the food and the dancing and the music? Are you going to sit outside and be right? Never noticed I was angry, just noticed I was right. The kids love, love, love stories. They just do. That's how they find out who they are, is what we were talking about, the funhouse mirror of Tom Cotton or Marjorie Taylor Greene, the narcissist, or the and they love that. And then, because I'm not stupid, I feed them. And then we do art. And art is how you learn about love. And art is how you learn about God. Art is how you learn who you are, what you love, and what's true, what your values are, what your fears are. And because they're so real, they just tell me. They don't say, like with us, it would be embarrassing to say, to you some of the things I'm afraid of. I'm a pretty afraid person. I'm a very faithful person, and I'm a very afraid and sensitive person. And you can have both things at the same time. But my kids will just say what they're afraid of. My dog's going to die. They're not going to be able to go on. Say, boy, you got that right. It's the end of the world. It's going to be the end of the world. And what we're going to do is we're going to stay really, really close to you before and during and after that. And it's going to take about a week until you feel anything like that. You might be happy again or even possibly get another pet. But we're going to just stay very close. That's God's love we deliver, that incredible. I mean, on my ring, I have GLWD, for God's love we remember. I've had this ring for 30 years. That organization in New York that brought food to people with AIDS that were shut in. That's who we're called to be. God's love we deliver. So
I have on mine WWALD. What would Anne Lamott do?
Oh, no, you don't.
Boom.
No,
Come
you
on.
don't.
I love this quote that you have from William Blake, and we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love. That was a nice quote. I don't really have a question around
That's
that.
a beautiful
But
quote.
what does bearing the beams of love mean?
To me, what it means is, as a girl of the 50s and the 60s, the value of a woman was how much you could do for men and how much men valued you, and that you were attractive and that you were charming and that you didn't steal the thunder. And that, and I was like a little flight attendant to the world. I was mixing blender drinks at 8, for my father's friends that came over. I learned to be the beams of love, to the whole world as a way of feeling that I was a valuable person. And to learn to endure the beams of love is grad school. And it means that we, back to Brother Lawrence, we practice the presence of God, and we practice bearing each other's love for us and our forgiveness of each other. It's hard to forgive ourselves, and bearing the beams of love means that very slowly we learn to forgive ourselves for every mistake, every harm we caused to other people, all the time we squandered, all the stupid shit that we chased down like, greyhound dogs at the track trying to catch the mechanical rabbit. And we live in that forgiveness, and we live in practicing taking off the armor and releasing the bodyguard to go maybe have a nice cup of coffee. And we're just going to be two human beings sitting here and I'm talking about God and love for an hour and a half,
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.